Welcome to the part 2 on the lecture on the US presidency. In this part, we will only discuss presidential system in the United States. In the previous part, we have compared this system to the other system called parliamentary system that exists in Europe. But in this system, our sole discussion will be on the US presidential system. In the US system, we have the three main categories of powers given to the US president by the Constitution: express powers, implied powers, and delegated powers. Express powers are those that are clearly noted in the US Constitution as the powers of the US president. So some examples of this are the president acting as the commander-in-chief, or commissioning military officers, or convening the U.S. Congress for special sessions, or pardoning criminals. There are some other express powers the president has but shares with the Senate and the Congress. For example, making treaties is one of those. So when the U.S. president goes abroad and signs an international treaty, then the treaty comes back to the U.S. and the U.S. Senate has to approve that treaty for it to become the law in the United States. Without that approval, the president's signing does not turn it into a law. Similarly, appointing ambassadors or members of the cabinet or Supreme Court justices are all powers shared by the president and the Senate. For example, if there's a vacancy in the U.S. Supreme Court, either because a particular justice passed away or retired or had some sort of health problems and stepped down or got impeached, then the president nominates an individual and the U.S. Senate has to approve that individual for that person to be installed as the Supreme Court justice. Similarly, approving legislation is a power that the president shares with the Congress. A bill or a law proposal comes to the Congress, and Congress needs to approve it, and then the proposal comes to the president, and he approves it, and it becomes the law of the land. Without each other's approvals, no bill can become the law. Even though U.S. President is a member of the executive branch, he actually takes part in the legislative process because of what I just explained in the last slide, the lawmaking process. So when a bill passes the Congress and comes before the president, he or she has three options. He can either sign, veto, or ignore the bill. It becomes the law. If he vetoes the bill, then the Congress can either review the bill again, and if the two-thirds of both the House and the Senate approve the bill, then the president's veto is considered to have been overridden and the bill becomes the law. And the president chooses the third option and simply ignores the bill for 10 days, not including Sundays to the count. Then the bill becomes the law if the U.S. Congress is in session on the 11th day. But it doesn't become the law, and it becomes pocket vetoed if the Congress is not working on the 11th day. So it's a little bit intricate when it comes to president vetoing by ignoring a bill, I should say. And because presidents are typically savvy political actors, they are well aware of this law, so they use it to their advantage. And when they don't want to sign a bill that they don't support, but not signing or vetoing costs them electorally somehow, then, or vice versa, then they simply play this game with the calendar and they let the laws create the same effect. Another type of veto power is what's called line item veto. This is basically a political leader approving certain sections of a law proposal but rejecting other sections. by scratching those sections that he doesn't like. So line item veto, this type of veto is a power given to governors in some states only, and Texas is one of those. However, U.S. President does not have line item veto power. So he either fully vetoes it or fully accepts it or ignores it. There's no fourth. When we look at the U.S. political history, we see that the presidents have vetoed bills over 2,500 times. So it's somewhat common, but what's not common is the president overriding those vetoes. It happened only 5% of the times in those 2,500 bills. Another power the president has is the pardoning power. The president can do one of 5 things to provide clemency to an individual. He can either end a sentence, which is called pardoning, or he can shorten or abate the length of the sentence, which is called commuting the sentence or commutation, or he can temporarily suspend the sentence until the case is further analyzed by some prosecutor or someone else, or perhaps some judge. It's called reprieving. He can also block further prosecution of the individual, but in this case he must be quite careful because he wouldn't want to face a obstruction of justice charge. So there have to be some legitimate grounds for the president to block the prosecution of a person. And then he can also clear the criminal record of a convicted offender. If a person's criminal record is not cleared, then clemency is considered to have been issued for the person. So these are the terms that are used interchangeably in the media sometimes, but the proper use of these terms is summarized in this slide here, according to the political science and U.S. Constitution legal scholars. President is also given war powers, but the president does not have the power to declare war on a foreign nation. He can instead deploy troops for international military operations as long as he or she notifies the Congress within 48 hours, and also the operation takes less than 60 days. So if the operation is to take longer than 60 days, then the congressional approval has to be taken. President's perhaps more important power in terms of war powers is the power to launch a nuclear strike without congressional approval. This is an enormous responsibility. Congress does not have to approve it because the founding fathers thought that this type of power has to reside with the president because of the time sensitivity of the attacks that the nation might face. So accordingly, always accompany the president no matter where he goes. A military officer carries these 2 bags called football and the biscuit. Biscuit simply confirms the president's ID to make sure that he actually is the president who is about to order the nuclear strike, and the football provides the actual code for the nuclear launch. And then it takes only 4 minutes for the actual launching to happen. For those who are familiar with the U.S. history, you would well know that Cuban Missile Crisis is one of the scariest points in U.S. history, political history. This is the time when the nation came closest to a nuclear war with Soviet Union. In the middle of the Cold War, a Russian submarine carrying nuclear warheads located near Cuba, just a hop away from the U.S. soil. They lost contact with Moscow because of a glitch in the radio system. And so because it was at such a time when the Cold War was at such an elevated level and the 2 parties were in a restless campaign to possess weapons against one another. The officers on deck decided that it meant that Moscow ordered them to launch the nuclear missile to the U.S. And according to the Russian Navy's rules, 3 of the most senior officers on deck have to approve this type of a launch in this situation, and 2 of them did. But the youngest one of the 3 officers said that he cannot be sure that this meant that the Russian leadership ordered them to launch, so he opted out. And it's thanks to him that the world and the U.S. society did not experience a nuclear war, at least not in this case. Cuban Missile Crisis, if you'd like to explore this thrilling episode in U.S. history, please check out the video. I'll be providing the link at the description section below. Another power the president has is the judicial appointment power. So the president nominates 2 Supreme Court justices, and this nomination power is quite important because if the Supreme Court consists of 9 members, it's chosen to be an odd number on purpose so that there's no tie in their votings, but which means that there's often a split, ideological split, 4-to-4 split in the court members or justices, which means one justice could tilt the ideological balance of the court to one way or the other. So when we look at the rulings of the U.S. Supreme Court, we see that vast majority of the rulings are actually pretty close rulings, 5-4 or 5-3 decisions, when Democratic presidents appoint certain justices versus 23% when Republican appointed justices are on the court. Implied powers are another type of powers the U.S. president has, and these are the type of powers that that are not clearly stated in the Constitution as the president's powers, but the presidents themselves are claiming that these powers rest with them. So, for example, removing cabinet members. Presidents argued in history that Constitution gives them the right to appoint these people into various cabinet positions, so therefore they should have the power to remove them from those positions if they are not doing a good job. But the U.S. Congress typically rejected this approach, saying that the president cannot unilaterally appoint people to the cabinet. It still requires congressional approval, so accordingly, president does not have the sole authority to remove cabinet members either. Delegated powers are the third type of powers the president has, and these are the type of powers that are typically given to the president by the Congress on a temporary basis. One way that we see this happening quite a bit is that a bill comes to the U.S. Congress to become the law. The Congress appreciates it as an important issue that addresses some problem, some significant problem in the nation, but for various reasons they do not want to pass a law, typically because the law becomes all too encompassing. For example, they don't want to happen that way. They want to address the problem on a more specific, more micro level approach rather than a macro level approach by creating a law that applies to the entire country. So when that happens, they simply pass the bill to the president's office and allows the president to create create policies and programs to address that problem instead.